Hello everyone and welcome to the channel. I'm Emmanuel, I'm a former Boeing 737 pilot and member of the PMDG 737 tech team. Welcome to the climb tutorial in the PMDG 737 in Flight Simulator 2024. So, starting the climb, we always have to keep an eye on our temperature and the outside conditions. If you're flying through clouds and the temperature drops below below plus 10 degrees TAT, then we need to turn on engine anti-ice. Note that you should anticipate that the temperature can drop by 2 or 3 degrees whenever you are flying through clouds. For now, let's go ahead and continue our climb a little bit over here, and since we might still be touching that cloud and the temperature is falling to 10 degrees, let's turn on engine anti-ice. The way we do this is by first turning the engine start switches into continuous, and then we turn the engine anti-ice on over here and verify that we get the thermal anti-ice indications on both engines. We are going to leave this on until we have completely cleared any of the areas where icing can be anticipated. Note that icing is anticipated when the temperature is plus 10 degrees or less and you're flying through visible moisture, which usually is either rain, clouds or snow. Passing 10,000 feet, let's go ahead and conduct the so-called 10 checks. So the 10 checks are as followed. First of all, we check the fuel, and if there is more than 453 kilos of fuel in the center tank, we turn on the center tank pumps. So in our case today, we got fuel balanced, so left and right tanks are balanced, and all 6 pumps are on. Then we turn the lights off, so landing lights, turn-off lights, taxi lights, logo light, and the wheel well light should be off at this point. Next up, we check the air conditioning and pressurization with the so-called reverse L check. That one starts up here on the pressurization indicator. Going through 10,000, we're generally looking at a differential pressure, that's the large needle, at around 4. The cabin altitude will be slowly climbing, and we see the cabin rate of climb down here as well. Then we move over to the right side, we cross-check the pressurization mode selected to be in the auto position, correct cruising altitude and landing field elevation is set, we check that the engine bleeds are on, APU bleed off, PAX auto, isolation valve auto, recirculation fans on, and finally going up to the temperatures, we just have a quick look at the temperatures inside the cabin, which should be anywhere between 25 to 30 degrees, which is normally just about the right position. From there, we are moving forward to the fasten seatbelt sign, and if there is no further turbulence expected throughout our flight, then we can turn the fasten seatbelt sign into the auto position, and we turn the no smoking switch off to indicate to us that the cabin is not secured. Moving further down to the main panel, we do a recall, and down to the pedestal, we cross-check that we are monitoring 1 to 1.5. If you're flying online, or if you're using an ATC add-on that supports CPDLC, this would also be the moment where we log on to CPDLC. And that is the 10 checks completed. Now, as you can see, we are clear of any icing, so let's go ahead and turn the engine anti-ice back off by switching the engine anti-ice switches to off, and thereafter the engine start selectors into the off position. Now we're established in a nice climb, and one thing that you always have to do, since this is a Boeing, is to synchronize the heading bug. Remember, if you have a track up display, you want to synchronize it with the actual heading. If you have a heading up display, just put it to the very top. Now, since we are cleared to climb above an altitude of flight level 150, we can go to the N1 limit page, and if we had any climb derate, so for example, if climb 1 would be active right now, then we could now press delete and remove that climb derate so that we go to full engine thrust. Now let's talk about a couple of things that can happen to you during your climb. And we are going to start with the intermediate level of procedure. So let's say that ATC tells us Ryanair 40 Bravo Echo, stop climb flight level 170. The moment we hear stop climb, we always press altitude hold. Then set the appropriate altitude on our MCP, and then we are going to press level change. The idea behind this SOP is that first of all you slow your climb by pressing alt hold. Even though we may not have actually processed which altitude we are now cleared to. Then, as a second step, we are going to set the target altitude and then select level change, which is important because when you are climbing at a couple of thousand feet a minute, you may already have passed the altitude that ATC wants to clear you to. Therefore, if the actual cleared altitude is now below you, by selecting level change, your airplane is actually going to fly the most direct way to that new altitude. Talking about level change, let's take a moment to discuss the different modes that we have available on our autopilot for the climb. So there are 3 different modes that can be used. The first is VNAV, which is the standard mode that we would be using most of the time. Then we got level change, which, except for the intermediate level of procedure, at my old airline would actually not have been allowed to be used. And then we got vertical speed. So when would we use which mode? Let's say we're clear to climb to flight level 200 now. By default, we set the new altitude, we cross-check it, 20,000 feet checked, and then we always press VNAV. So whenever you're cleared for a climb, always press VNAV. Unless VNAV is already active, then we simply verify that VNAV is the active mode over here. Now, as we're climbing towards our cleared altitude, there are a couple of things that we need to take into consideration, with the most important one being the rate of climb that we have. So, nearing our cleared altitude, we want to fly a maximum of 3,000 feet a minute when we got 3,000 feet to go, a maximum of 2,000 at 2,000 feet to go, and a maximum of 1,000 feet a minute when we got 1,000 feet to go to our cleared altitude. Depending on the circumstances, you can accept a slight deviation, so now 2,000 to go, 2,200 feet a minute is okay. Personally, I would draw the line at 2,300, so 300 feet above the maximum. Now we're approaching 1,000 to go, so we actually have to go into vertical speed and select 1,000 feet a minute. The reason we are doing this is our TCAS. So when you're approaching your cleared altitude, and you're climbing at a very high rate of climb or descending at a very high rate of descent, a nonsense TCAS array may actually be caused. This mostly happens when you are at lower altitudes because you may be climbing very fast and someone else is descending very fast from a higher altitude. Let's say we're cleared to 20,000 feet and another aircraft is descending towards 21,000 feet. TCAS is going to issue a traffic advisory, that's traffic, when you got 40 seconds from a potential impact. So imagine that you're climbing at 2,000 feet a minute and the other guy is descending at 2,000 feet a minute, then you may get that TCAS advisory. At 20 seconds from a potential impact, you are going to get a resolution advisory. Again, imagine after takeoff you're climbing at 3,000 to 4,000 feet a minute, someone else is descending to 1,000 feet above your cleared level at also 4,000 feet a minute. That may very well result in a resolution advisory, even though you are not actually conflicting, because TCAS does not care what your level of altitude is. TCAS only cares about the trajectory of the aircraft. So, we're now clear to climb to a higher altitude. Let's go up to 30,000 feet. VNAV engaged and checked. And every 10,000 feet in the climb, so at 10,000 feet, at 20,000, at 30,000, and at 40,000, we're always repeating the reverse L technique. So we're always checking the differential pressure, cabin altitude, cabin rate of climb, mode selector auto, bleeds and packs correctly set, and also the temperature inside the aircraft, since the 737's air conditioning system simply sucks and is going to give you anything but a nice temperature. So you always have to readjust those knobs to keep it somewhere in the reasonable levels. Between 25 to 30 degrees is where the passengers normally feel very well. So we are now climbing, and air traffic control asks us if we can maintain or if we can reach a certain altitude at a certain waypoint. There is a couple of ways on how to first of all check and later manipulate this. So let's say ATC asked us which level we can reach at Pinos. We look down here, we see, okay, flight level 241. Now they asked us if we can expedite that climb and what level we can reach then. Let's go to the VNAV climb page, and we got two options available down here. The first one is maximum rate, where the airplane simply climbs at the best possible rate, so it minimizes the time to a cleared altitude. And then you also got maximum angle, which is where the airplane minimizes the distance to reach a certain altitude. So if they simply want us to climb as quickly as possible, we would select maximum rate, and you can see what speeds that is giving us down here. Execute this, and now the airplane is going to climb at that better rate, and also going to give us the adjusted prediction. In case of Penis, since it is so close, it's only 200 feet higher, but you can see how that has an impact on the waypoints thereafter. Now, maximum rate would be used if ATC wants us to simply expedite the climb. However, if we need to meet any restrictions, so for example they tell us to pass Olno at the highest possible flight level, then we would use maximum angle. You can see that gives us a different speed than the maximum rate, and using maximum angle we are going to have the best possible climb gradient over the ground. So if you need to meet any restriction and you're unsure if you can do it, maximum angle is always the way to go. Now, when ATC tells us that we can resume a normal rate, we just go back to Econ, execute this, and now the airplane is going to return to the most economical speed. So we're now getting cleared to climb up to cruise level, which is flight level 370. First of all, how do we know what the best cruise level is? Well, go down to the cruise page, have a look at where the optimum is, and since the 737 has such small margins at cruising level, we generally always want to cruise at or below the optimum. So if the optimum is 374, then we would choose flight level 370 as our cruise level. Let's just imagine a hypothetical situation here where the optimum would be something like flight level 388 and the maximum flight level 395. Well, 200 feet difference. Technically speaking, go to 370 first, step climb when the optimum reaches the level. As long as it is within 200 or 300 feet of the other possible altitude, I would actually go up to that other level. So that much about choosing your cruise level. Once we're actually cleared to the cruise level, we verify three things. First of all, set the level. Set. Flight level 370 checked. Verify that we're in VNAV. And then cross-check. Flight level 370 set once. Flight level 370 set twice. And flight level 370 set 3 times, so in the FMC. And that is at or below the optimum. And also verify that we're monitoring 1 to 1.5 on the second radio. And that is what you do when you are cleared to your cruising level. Now, as our center tank starts to run dry, we will get a master caution fuel. In the very best case, you're actually going to notice that it is about to run dry, so it has like 10 or 20 kilos in there, and then you would already turn off the center tank pumps. But latest when the master caution fuel comes on, you want to turn off your center tank fuel pumps. Technically speaking, you're not supposed to wait until the thing runs dry. I just did it for the tutorial because I wanted to finish explaining the cruise altitude procedure. So now we're climbing and things are getting a little bit more relaxed. We are looking at our flight plan and at the expected arrival time, which we can find on the progress page. Down here we see 1352 with 4.2 tons remaining. We can compare this with our flight plan. We got 1330. So if you were not flying a low-cost carrier, but if you were flying, let's say, a legacy carrier, then you could think about adjusting your cost index to bring down the arrival time. Flying for a low-cost carrier, they generally don't want that. They just want to minimize the fuel consumption and don't really care about the delay. If you think about it, it does make sense for an airline like Ryanair to do that, because they don't have any connecting flights. Ryanair is a point-to-point airline. It doesn't matter if you arrive a little bit late, as long as it is within 3 hours of the arrival time, which is where you start paying compensation. But it doesn't matter if you arrive a little late. Your passengers will not have connecting flights, or if they do, then it is up to them to reach them and not up to you to deliver them on time. For this reason, low-cost carrier, maintain your current cost index. Legacy airline, think about adjusting the cost index a little bit to get your arrival time improved, depending on the amount of fuel that it is going to cost. So normally you may be able to make up a minute or two. Is that worth spending 200 kilos of fuel, which are going to cost $400? Probably not. So you're probably going to prefer just to keep the cost index anyway. Passing through flight level 300, we are going to select the angle of bank selector down to 10 degrees. Some airlines also use 15. The reason we do this is because heading select in the 737 is a dump mode. Contrary to, for example, a 747 or a 777, where it would dynamically adjust the maximum bank angle, the 737, as long as you don't do a very shallow turn only, like 10 degrees, is always going to bank to whatever the bank selector has selected, and at high altitudes that may cause a considerable increase in the lower amber band, which you kind of want to avoid because it would mean that your airplane gets closer to the operational margins. LNAV has an automatic protection in. LNAV dynamically determines the maximum bank angle available. However, we always want to select the angle of bank selector, which does not apply to LNAV, only to heading select, VOLOG and approach modes. So you always want to keep that at 10 degrees when you're above flight level 300. Now, we do see a couple clouds outside. Let's just talk about when you do not need to use anti-ice any longer. So we talked about the TAT being 10 degrees or less earlier. But there is another limit, and you can find that one on the progress page, next page, number 2, and that is your SAT, the static air temperature. If that one is below minus 40 degrees, so minus 40, minus 41 and onwards, then anti-ice is no longer needed, for the simple fact that any moisture that is in the air would be so deeply frozen that it is not going to be relevant for your flight at all any longer. It is simply going to bounce off your airplane and not going to freeze to it. And that's about everything that applies to anti-ice usage over here. We can also talk about wing anti-ice, and wing anti-ice is used very rarely. The reason for that is that you only use it to remove ice that has already frozen on the airplane from your aircraft. So how can you see that there is ice frozen to the wings? Well, it is rather difficult to see like this, is it? Well, the first signs of ice are always going to be on the wiper. So if your wiper starts building up ice, then you will also have ice on the wings. Now, very small amounts of ice are not too much of a problem, but if it becomes more, then you want to use wing anti-ice in order to clear any of that icing from your wings. And about a minute after you've turned wing anti-ice on, you want to turn it back off again. You don't want it to be on all the time. First of all, it drains a lot of bleed air, which can cause pressurization issues at higher flight levels. And secondly, you want to avoid ice from melting when it reaches the leading edge, flowing aft onto the surfaces of the wings that are not heated and freezing over there. So wing anti-ice always used as a de-icer to remove ice only, while engine anti-ice is continuously used when in icing conditions. Now, that pretty much completes our review of the anti-icing system in the climb. Now, from here on, there are a few more things that you want to keep in your mind. The first of them is the altitude to which you are cleared to climb. So at large vertical speeds, reduce your vertical speed using VS mode. But be very careful when you are flying at very high altitudes. In a situation like now, where the wind might change for a bit, that could cause a temporary increase in the rate of climb in VNAV mode until VNAV reaches the target speed again. You will notice that generally VNAV is a very, very slow system. It only reacts slowly to changes, and especially when the wind changes, it may take time to correct the rate of climb. But as you can see, at high altitudes, even at maximum thrust, you may no longer be capable of doing 1,000 feet a minute. The airplane may drop below 1,000 feet a minute. Assuming that you would incorrectly select vertical speed to 1,000 feet a minute, or even worse, higher, when you are approaching your cleared altitude because of a wind change where VNAV temporarily struggles, you may find yourself in a situation where you are demanding a higher rate of climb from the airplane than the engines can give you while maintaining your airspeed. Therefore, the airspeed may start to drop, and that could potentially cause a low speed situation in which you might be flying behind the power curve and therefore have to descend to be able to catch up your speed again. Generally speaking, you would not want to fly the airplane below either the managed speed, or what is recommendable is that you just go down here, you select maximum angle, you see which speed it gives you, and you absolutely do not want to fly the airplane below this. Flying the airplane slower than the speed for the maximum angle climb would be flying on the backside of the power curve. Now, backside of the power curve basically means that due to the angle at which the airplane is moving through the air, like if you look at it from the front here, then you got this as your drag. Imagine the pitch being higher, then you would have a larger cross-section of the airplane, which in turn would result in more drag, and therefore at some point, basically when flying below the maximum angle climb speed, you would fly on what we call the backside of the power curve, where you need more thrust to sustain a lower airspeed. You don't want to get into that situation, so try to do something against this as good as you can. Now, that pretty much concludes our climb tutorial. We're about to reach our cruising altitude. You will notice that as soon as the airplane is reaching that altitude, it'll go into VNAV path. And do note that if you're flying in any other mode than VNAV, so if you were flying, for example, in vertical speed, like this, your airplane's going to go to alt acquire. As soon as it goes in alt acquire, press VNAV so that you resume the most economical speed that your airplane can fly. And that concludes the climb tutorial. Finally, when reaching your cruise level, go to the N1 limit page and select maximum continuous thrust, which increases the maximum thrust that your engines can use. The reason we do this is because we want the engines to have the highest possible thrust in case you enter a turbulence. Now, more on that later on in the cruise tutorial. For now, I would like to thank you very much for watching. Hope that you've learned something. As always, leave a like, comment and subscribe, and if you really love what I'm doing on the channel, I would appreciate a small donation through the Buy Me Coffee link in the video description below. Thank you very much for watching, and I'm looking forward to see you all again on the next one.